Welcome to another deep dive. We've got a ton of research on FLR networks today. It looks like you're really trying to figure out how FLR works.
Yeah, it seems like you want to know how Flare brings smart contracts to chains that don't have them.
That's a great place to start. So FLR is this layer 1 blockchain, right?
Mm.
And it wants to bring smart contracts to chains like XRP, Litecoin,
Even dogecoin.
yeah, Dogecoin,
Oh.
which currently don't have smart contract capabilities. But how does that even work?
Well, one of the sources you sent over had an interesting analogy. For these things, Flare calls F assets. So imagine you have some XRP just sitting on the XRP ledger.
Okay.
You lock it up there. And then on the Flare blockchain, you get a representation of that XRP. And that's called an F asset. In this case, it would be FXRP.
So it's not like my actual XRP is moving over to FLR. It's more like I'm getting a tokenized version of it.
Exactly. And the really neat part is how Flare makes sure these F assets are actually trustworthy and reliable. They use something called a state connector. You can think of it like a secure bridge between Flare and the other blockchains.
Okay, so it's like a messenger that verifies information.
It's a super reliable messenger.
A super reliable messenger. Okay. But how does it do that without relying on some central authority? I mean, that kind of goes against the whole point of blockchains, right? Being decentralized.
Yeah, you're hitting on the key point. That's where the trust minimize part of it comes in. Instead of having a single third party calling the shots, the state connector actually uses a system of validators to reach a consensus on the state of the other blockchain.
So it's decentralized and secure.
Right.
So are these validators checking each other's work to make sure the information coming in is accurate?
Yeah, exactly. And that's really important for how Flare maintains security, is how they ensure that the FXRP on their chain actually corresponds to the real XRP that's locked up on the XRP ledger. But there's another part to this whole thing you were curious about. The Flare Time Series Oracle.
Right, the FTSO, yeah. I saw that term in a couple of the articles. It sounded like it's some kind of data feed.
Yeah.
Honestly, I was a little fuzzy on the details.
So think of the FTSO as a decentralized way to bring real-world data onto the Flare blockchain. And that data could be anything from like asset prices to even weather information, really. But it's particularly important for DeFi applications, which need that accurate data to actually work.
So like a decentralized version of those price feeds you see on crypto exchanges.
Yeah.
Okay, but how does it make sure the data is actually accurate?
That's where the FTSO's consensus mechanism comes in. It uses a network of data providers who stake FLR tokens, that's Flare's native token, by the way, to provide data and vote on its validity. And these data providers, they're incentivized to give accurate information because if they provide bad data, they risk losing their stake.
Okay, that makes sense. So the FTSO is bringing in this real-world data, and it's doing it in a way that's decentralized and secure. Okay, that's starting to paint a clearer picture for me. But why is this important for someone like me? Like, let's say I hold XRP. What are the benefits?
Well, imagine if your XRP could be used in all sorts of decentralized applications.
Okay.
Right now, XRP is mostly for payments, but with Flare, you could use your FXRP in DeFi protocols to, say, earn interest. You could use it as collateral for loans or trade it on decentralized exchanges, all sorts of things.
So instead of just sitting there, my XRP could be working for me. Okay, that's starting to sound interesting. But how easy is it for developers to actually build these applications on Flare? I'm not a developer myself, but I know different blockchains have different learning curves.
Well, that's one of the really great things about Flare. It's designed to be what's called EVM compatible. EVM stands for Ethereum Virtual Machine, which is basically the environment where smart contracts run on Ethereum.
So is EVM like the language of Ethereum smart contracts?
You can think of it like that.
But I thought Flare was its own separate blockchain.
It is, but being EVM compatible means that developers who already know how to build on Ethereum can easily take their applications, bring them over to Flare, or even create new ones using all the same tools and languages.
So it makes it much easier.
Exactly, so it dramatically lowers the barrier to entry for developers.
So we've got this situation where Flare makes it easy for developers to build applications, right?
Yeah.
You can bring in data from the real world, and it lets me do more with my XRP. Okay. I'm starting to see why people are excited about this.
And we've really only just scratched the surface. We haven't even gotten into specific use cases yet. It seems like, from the stuff you've sent, that you're especially interested in how Flare compares to Ethereum.
Yeah.
And also what the potential is for things like cross-chain NFTs.
You're reading my mind. I'm ready to dive deeper.
You're curious how Flare compares to Ethereum. It makes sense. Ethereum is kind of the big player in the smart contract world.
Yeah. From what we talked about so far, it sounds like they both let you use smart contracts.
Mhm.
What are the big differences, though? What makes Flare special?
One of the things Flare really focuses on is bringing non-smart contract assets onto the platform. Like, it's built into how it works from the very beginning.
Okay.
You can bring assets onto Ethereum too, but it's not as central to Ethereum.
Yeah, that makes sense with Flare's whole thing of bringing smart contracts to those chains. What about that FTSO thing? We talked about how it's Flare's way of getting data from the real world onto the blockchain. Does Ethereum have something like that?
Ethereum uses things called oracles, like third-party oracles, like Chainlink. Chainlink's a pretty big project.
Okay.
But having something like the FTSO built directly into Flare that's decentralized is a pretty big difference.
So it's like Flare has its own data source already built in,
Yeah.
whereas Ethereum relies on these external providers. Are there any other big differences?
Well, Flare, like lots of the newer blockchains, is aiming for lower fees than Ethereum.
Okay.
That's important for people using the blockchain and also developers.
Right. High fees are a pain,
Yeah.
especially for smaller transactions.
Mhm.
Okay, so we've got the differences between Flare and Ethereum down, but I remember from my notes that people are talking about bringing smart contracts right onto the XRP ledger.
Yeah.
So how does that fit in?
People are talking a lot about bringing smart contracts directly to the XRP ledger, maybe using an EVM-compatible sidechain.
So there could be two ways of getting smart contracts for XRP, directly on XRPL or through Flare.
Right.
Would they compete with each other, or could they work together?
It's interesting. Flare's CEO actually said that having smart contracts right on the XRP ledger would actually be a good thing for Flare.
Oh, wow.
It could actually make Flare's system better, so it's not like one has to win and the other has to lose.
Huh. I would have thought they'd be rivals. So how would smart contracts on XRPL help Flare?
Well, remember those F assets?
Yeah.
If XRPL has smart contracts directly on it, then it could offer better ways to manage those F assets, like the locking and issuing of them.
Okay.
So it could make things smoother and more efficient for people using Flare.
Okay, so the better XRPL gets, the better the whole Flare system could get.
Mhm.
That makes sense. You know, one of the things that really stood out to me in the research was cross-chain NFTs on Flare. Can you tell me more about that?
Cross-chain NFTs are really interesting. Imagine an NFT that changes based on what's happening on other blockchains.
Okay.
So say you have an NFT on Flare that represents something in a video game. With this cross-chain stuff, that NFT could change how it looks or unlock new features based on what's happening in that game, even if that game is on a totally different blockchain.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So instead of being trapped on one blockchain, NFTs could interact with a whole bunch of different blockchains.
Yeah.
Are there any other examples of what you could do with these cross-chain NFTs?
Oh, yeah, tons. Think about NFTs that represent things in the real world, like a painting or real estate. With cross-chain stuff, the ownership of those NFTs could be verified more easily and transferred between different platforms.
So it could change how we think about owning and interacting with digital things.
Exactly.
I can see a lot of potential there.
And that's just one area where Flare being all about making different blockchains talk to each other could lead to some cool stuff.
Okay.
But before we go too crazy, it's good to remember that there are still some challenges and risks.
Right. What are some of those downsides or hurdles for Flare? So we've talked about what makes Flare unique and some of the challenges it might face. But what about the tokens themselves? I mean, what kind of impact could Flare have on the prices of different cryptocurrencies?
Ah, the million-dollar question.
I know you can't predict the future, but I'd love to get your perspective on this.
Sure, it all boils down to utility and adoption, right?
Yeah.
If Flare can actually unlock all these new use cases, that could really increase demand, which theoretically could affect prices.
Makes sense. So let's focus on XRP for a second. Seems like that's a big part of what Flare is trying to do. We know it's used a lot for payments, but how could Flare change things for XRP?
Well, imagine XRP being a part of the whole decentralized finance world, that DeFi thing. Through those F assets we talked about, people holding XRP or even trading it on those decentralized exchanges.
So it could be more than just sending payments. Are there any other tokens that could get a boost from Flare like that?
Oh yeah, definitely. Litecoin, Dogecoin, Stellar Lumens, really. Anything that can be bridged to Flare could potentially get in on those new use cases.
Okay.
Like take Stellar Lumens or XLM. It's already known for those fast, cheap transactions, especially for things like cross-border payments.
Yeah, I remember reading about some of their partnerships in that area.
Right. Now, Imagine combining that with all of the smart contract stuff that Flare brings to the table. Suddenly, you could use XLM and all these DeFi protocols, making it more useful and bringing in more users.
So it's like Flare makes these existing cryptos even more powerful. It's not necessarily about creating something totally new.
Exactly. It's about building on what's already there and opening up new possibilities.
Now, what about Ethereum?
Mhm.
We talked about how Flare is different, but could Ethereum actually benefit if Flare is successful?
It's a good question. Even though Flare is doing its own thing, it's designed to work with Ethereum in some ways.
Okay.
Remember, it's EVM compatible. That means developers could build things on Flare that can actually talk to and work with stuff that's already on Ethereum.
So they can kind of help each other out.
Exactly. When one blockchain does well, it can help the whole space grow.
This has been a super interesting deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground here, from the technical details of how Flare actually works to the potential impact on all these different cryptocurrencies. Any final thoughts for our listener as they explore Flare network further?
I think the main takeaway is that Flare is doing something really important. It's trying to solve a real problem with blockchains not being able to work together easily. And if it works, it could change how we use and think about cryptocurrencies.
It's definitely worth paying attention to. I know I'll be keeping an eye on it. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It was great to be here.
Back it up like it's on. Bump, 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 bump it, bump, bump it, bump. Take it, take it, take it. Bump, 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 bump it, bump, bump. Back it up like it's on.